There were exactly 47 messages waiting for me in the secret family group chat by the time I realized my phone was vibrating. The chat was titled, Savvy's Dream Day, No Killjoys. The creator was my mother. The participants included my father, my younger sister Savannah, her maid of honor, and a phone number ending in 8814, my old phone number. The one I had downgraded to a backup device 6 months ago and kept sitting in my desk drawer purely to receive two-factor authentication codes for my accounting software. My mother, who had never bothered to update my contact information in her phone, despite me telling her 3 times, had accidentally added me to the very chat they were using to plan my financial and social exclusion. I didn't reply immediately. I didn't type out an angry paragraph and hit send. I just sat at my mahogany desk, the blue light of the screen reflecting in my glasses, and read every single message. Message 12 was my mother telling Savannah to make sure I didn't find out the real cost of the floral arrangements. Message 26 was my sister laughing that I would ruin the aesthetic of the bridal party anyway. But it was message 42 that made the air in my home office go perfectly, completely still. It was from my father. It read, Just spoke to the bank. Their $100,000 wire from Arthur's trust should clear by Friday for the venue and the caterer. Just keep Elena distracted. If she finds out we're draining the old man's fund for a party, she'll do one of her boring financial lectures and ruin the vibe. I stared at the screen. They thought they were draining my late grandfather's trust fund to pay for a $100,000 wedding. What my father didn't know, what none of them knew because they had never once bothered to read the legal documents they signed, was that Grandpa Arthur hadn't left them in charge of that money. He had left me in charge, and I was about to give them the most expensive financial lecture of their lives. To understand the sheer, breathtaking audacity of that group chat, you have to understand the sterling family dynamic. I am 29 years old and I work as a forensic estate auditor. My job, in the simplest terms, is to investigate the money people leave behind. When a wealthy individual dies and the heirs start accusing each other of stealing the silver or hiding offshore accounts, the courts hire my firm. I trace the wires. I find the hidden LLCs. I read the fine print that everyone else skips. I am a professional lie detector for dead people's money. To my family, however, my career was just a punchline. I was the boring sister. I wore neutral colors, worked 60-hour weeks, and preferred the company of a good spreadsheet to a crowded nightclub. My sister Savannah was 25, and she was the family's crown jewel. Savannah was a lifestyle influencer, though her only actual lifestyle was spending our parents' money. She was vivacious, loud, and possessed the kind of manufactured charm that got her out of speeding tickets and into exclusive reservations. Our parents, Marcus and Helen, worshipped her. They treated Savannah like a celebrity they were lucky enough to manage, and they treated me like the unglamorous accountant they were forced to keep on retainer. The divide in our family had always been obvious, but it became a chasm the day Savannah got engaged to Chase. Chase was a crypto entrepreneur whose primary talent seemed to be losing money while wearing designer sneakers. The moment the ring was on her finger, my mother went into full-blown wedding hysteria. Savannah didn't just want a wedding. She wanted a televised coronation. The aesthetic, she announced, was Tuscan vineyard meets modern royalty. The guest list was 300 people. The venue was a historic, exclusive botanical estate that charged a premium just to walk through the gates. I was happy for her, initially, but the cracks started showing almost immediately during a Sunday family dinner, about 6 months before the wedding. I had shown up at my parents' house with a bottle of wine, expecting to hear about the bridal party. Savannah sat at the head of the table, flipping through a glossy bridal magazine, while my mother furiously typed on her iPad. "So," I said, trying to be a supportive sister, "have you decided on the bridesmaid dresses? I need to know what color shoes to look for." The dining room went dead silent. My father suddenly became very interested in cutting his steak. Savannah exchanged a long, meaningful look with our mother. "Oh, Elena," my mother said, using the soft, pitying voice she usually reserved for injured animals. "We actually decided to go in a different direction for the bridal party. Savvy really wants a very specific, cohesive visual aesthetic for the photos. Her influencer friends all have the same profile. We thought it would be best if you were just a guest. You'd be so much more comfortable sitting in the audience anyway. You hate being the center of attention. I put my fork down. It wasn't about my comfort. It was about my size 12 figure and my glasses standing next to her size 2 spray-tanned friends. I didn't fit the brand. I'm your only sister, I said, my voice quiet but firm. Savannah sighed, rolling her eyes. Don't make this a whole dramatic thing, Elena. You know you don't even like getting your hair and makeup done. Plus, the dresses I picked are like $2,000 each. And Mom said you're super tight on your budget right now because you just bought that condo. I had bought a condo, in cash, because I am an auditor and I save my money, but I let it go. I had spent 29 years learning that fighting for a place at the Sterling family table only resulted in them pointing out why you didn't belong there. Fine, I said, taking a sip of my wine. I'll just be a guest. From that moment on, I was completely frozen out of the wedding planning. They stopped inviting me to the dress fittings. They didn't tell me about the cake tasting. I was treated like a distant cousin who was only invited out of obligation. But while they were freezing me out of the wedding, they were secretly warming their hands by a fire they didn't own. Which brings me back to the group chat on that Tuesday evening, and the name, Arthur. Arthur was my paternal grandfather. He was a tough, self-made man who built a mid-sized logistics company from a single delivery truck. Grandpa Arthur was pragmatic, frugal, and despised frivolous spending. He drove a 10-year-old sedan, clipped coupons, and thought a luxury vacation was staying at a hotel that offered a free continental breakfast. When I was in college, Grandpa Arthur's health began to decline. My parents and Savannah rarely visited him. They complained that his nursing home smelled like bleach and that he was too grumpy. But I went every Wednesday and Sunday. I brought him his favorite black coffee, and we would sit in his room for hours playing chess and talking about the economy. He didn't love me more because I was special. He loved me because I showed up. When Grandpa Arthur passed away 3 years ago, his estate was substantial. My father, Marcus, assumed he would inherit the entire fortune as the only son. He was already planning to buy a vacation home in Aspen before the funeral was even over. But Grandpa Arthur hadn't built a logistics empire by trusting people who were bad at logistics. Instead of a simple will, Grandpa Arthur had established the Arthur Sterling Family Trust. The terms were beautifully, ruthlessly specific. The trust would distribute a modest, fixed monthly allowance to my parents to ensure they were comfortable. But the principal balance, which hovered right around $2 million, was locked down. And more importantly, he hadn't made my father the trustee. He had made me the sole trustee and executor. I was the only person with the legal authority to manage the investments, approve extraordinary distributions, and sign off on major withdrawals. Grandpa Arthur had included a specific morality and responsibility clause. The funds were strictly to be used for education, medical emergencies, or the acquisition of a primary residence. Frivolous lifestyle expenses were explicitly forbidden. My parents had been furious when the lawyer read the trust, but over the last 3 years they seemed to have accepted it. I managed the funds quietly. I authorized their monthly allowance. I kept the principal invested. I did my job, or so I thought. Sitting at my desk, staring at my old iPhone 8, my father's message mocked me from the screen. The $100,000 wire from Arthur's trust should clear by Friday. How? How could my father authorize a wire transfer from a heavily restricted trust account without my signature? I didn't panic. Panic is for people who don't understand the paperwork. I reached into my desk, pulled out my primary laptop, and logged into my highly secure fiduciary portal. I navigated to the back end of the Arthur Sterling Family Trust. The dashboard loaded. The principal balance was intact, but there, sitting in the pending transactions queue, was a wire transfer request for exactly $100,000 payable to the Grand Bella Estate and Catering Company. I clicked on the authorization documents attached to the wire request. A PDF loaded on my screen. It was a distribution authorization form. The reason for the withdrawal was listed as medical emergency life-saving surgical intervention for Helen Sterling. My blood went completely cold. They hadn't just requested the money, They had committed federal wire fraud. My parents had submitted a forged medical invoice to the bank, claiming my mother was dying and needed an experimental, out-of-pocket surgery. They had forged my signature on the trustee authorization line. They had crafted an elaborate, highly illegal lie to bypass the trust's restrictions, all to secure $100,000 for a botanical garden and some overpriced appetizers for Savannah's wedding. My father assumed that because he had forged the paperwork and faxed it directly to the branch manager, a man he played golf with, the wire would clear automatically by Friday. He thought the money would hit the venue's account, the contracts would be locked in, and by the time I eventually reviewed the quarterly statements months from now, the wedding would be over. He figured I might be angry, but that I wouldn't actually press charges against my own parents after the fact. He was treating my fiduciary duty like a family suggestion. I looked back at the old iPhone. The group chat was still pinging. Savannah, OMG Dad, you're a lifesaver. The florist said if the wire didn't clear by Friday, she was going to release the peonies to another bride. Helen, Mom, don't worry, darling. Your father handled it. Arthur's money is finally being put to good use instead of just sitting in Elena's boring little spreadsheets. Just remember, nobody posts anything about the venue cost on Facebook until after the wedding. Maid of honor. LOL, is Elena still wearing that awful beige dress she bought at the mall? Savannah. Yes, I told the photographer to put her in the back row so she blends into the wall. I sat in the quiet of my home office, listening to the hum of my computer tower. They weren't just stealing from the trust, they were laughing at me while they did it. They were using my grandfather's legacy, the money he had worked 60-hour weeks in a delivery truck to build, to fund a vanity project, and they were mocking me for doing exactly what he had trusted me to do. A lesser woman would have taken a screenshot of the chat, sent it to the family group text, and screamed at them. A lesser woman would have immediately called the bank and canceled the pending wire, effectively saving them from themselves. But I am a forensic estate auditor. I don't stop frauds while they are in the planning phase. I wait until the ink is dry on the contracts and the liabilities are completely legally binding. I looked at the calendar on my desk. Savannah's rehearsal dinner was scheduled for exactly 3 weeks from tonight. The venue, the florist, and the caterer all required payment in full to be cleared 30 days before the event, which meant the deadline for this $100,000 wire was this coming Friday. If the wire didn't clear, Savannah would lose the venue, the food, and the flowers, and my parents would be legally on the hook for the breach of contract. I turned back to my fiduciary portal. I looked at the pending wire for $100,000. I didn't cancel it. Instead, I used my administrative access to place a fraud review hold on the entire trust account. This didn't cancel the wire outright. It suspended it in a bureaucratic purgatory. To my father and the bank manager, the system would simply show the wire as processing. It would stay processing on Wednesday. It would stay processing on Thursday. And on Friday afternoon, exactly 1 hour before the venue's payment deadline, the bank's automated fraud department would hard decline the transfer due to flagged discrepancies in the medical invoices. I picked up the old iPhone. I took 50 high-resolution screenshots of the secret group chat, capturing every single admission of fraud, every forged medical claim, and every cruel joke at my expense. I backed the photos up to an encrypted cloud drive. Then I opened a new tab on my computer and looked up the cancellation policies for the Grand Bella Estate and Catering Company. The policy was brutal. If final payment was not received by the 30-day mark, the reservation was immediately forfeited, and the client was liable for a 50% inconvenience penalty. My parents were about to owe $50,000 out of their own pockets for a wedding that wasn't going to happen. I closed my laptop. I didn't send a single message to the chat. I just went to my closet, looked at the perfectly tailored, deeply expensive emerald green silk dress I had quietly bought for the rehearsal dinner, and smiled. There is a very specific, heavy kind of silence that exists in the 48 hours before a financial crime is officially discovered. In my line of work, we call it the float. It's that brief, blissful window where the fraudster believes they have successfully outsmarted the system, and the system is simply taking its time processing their victory. For my parents, Wednesday and Thursday were the float. I spent those 2 days going to my office, auditing corporate ledgers and drinking green tea, while my backup iPhone 8 vibrated quietly in my desk drawer. I checked the secret group chat twice a day, reading the messages with the detached fascination of a biologist watching bacteria multiply in a petri dish. On Wednesday afternoon, Savannah sent a barrage of photos to the chat. They were pictures of massive, cascading floral arrangements featuring imported white orchids. Savannah: "Florist just sent the mock-ups. Can't wait for the wire to clear so we can lock these in. Elena would literally have a heart attack if she knew these cost more than her car." Helen: "Mom, they are breathtaking, darling. A sterling bride deserves nothing less. And don't worry about Elena. She doesn't understand the value of an investment piece. She still buys her shoes on clearance." I looked down at my sensible, incredibly comfortable clearance shoes, and then I pulled up the Arthur Sterling Family Trust portal on my monitor. The $100,000 wire transfer request still sat there, glowing in amber font. Processing, compliance, hold. By Thursday morning, the tone in the group chat began to shift, just slightly. The confident arrogance was replaced by the first microscopic cracks of impatience. "Marcus, Dad. Jim at the bank said the wire is still under a standard compliance review. Usually these things clear in 24 hours. He's going to make a call to the back office today and push it through." I smiled at my screen. Jim was the branch manager my father played golf with. Jim was a glorified customer service representative who authorized car loans and opened checking accounts. Jim had absolutely zero authority over the Corporate Trust Compliance Division, which operates under strict federal regulations. Jim couldn't push a $100,000 medical disbursement through a fraud hold any more than he could launch a space shuttle. But my father, a man whose entire life operated on the assumption that a firm handshake and a round of golf could bypass any rule, genuinely believed Jim was going to fix it. "Savannah. Dad, it has to clear by tomorrow at 4 p.m. The venue manager just emailed me. If they don't have the funds, they release our date to a waitlisted couple. I will literally die if I lose the Grand Bella." "Marcus, Dad. It's fine, Savvy. Relax. The money is there. It's just red tape." Friday arrived. I worked from home that day. I made myself a fresh pot of coffee, sat at my mahogany desk, and opened 2 windows side by side on my laptop. On the left was the Trust Fiduciary portal. On the right was an application that mirrored my old iPhone's text messages directly to my screen. I didn't want to miss a single second of the collision. At 10 a.m., the group chat was quiet. At 12:30 p.m., Savannah sent a single, terrified question mark. At 2:15 p.m., my father texted, "Jim is not answering my calls. I'm driving down to the branch." I watched the clock on my computer monitor slowly tick toward the venue's 4 p.m. deadline. In the banking world, automated compliance declines usually batch and process at the end of the business day. At exactly 3:47 p.m., the amber text on my trust portal blinked, vanished, and was replaced by a glaring crimson red banner. "Transaction declined. Fraudulent documentation flag. Account locked." It took exactly 4 minutes for my father to find out. At 3:51 p.m., the group chat exploded. "Marcus, Dad. The wire was rejected. Jim just came out of his office sweating. He said the corporate fraud division flagged the medical invoices as inconsistent and hard declined the transfer. They locked the trust account." Savannah: "What? Dad, it's 3:55. The venue closes at 4. What do you mean rejected?" Helen: "Mom. Marcus, call them back. Tell them it's a mistake. Tell them I'm dying." Marcus: "Dad. I can't. Jim said corporate took the file. If I push it, they'll launch a full investigation." Helen: "The invoices were fake. If they investigate, we're looking at federal wire fraud." I took a slow, deep breath, savoring the absolute panic radiating from the screen. They had finally realized that Grandpa Arthur's money was not a piggy bank they could smash open with a golf club. Savannah: "I don't care about your invoices. The venue is going to cancel my wedding. Do something." If you have ever dealt with a narcissistic family, you know that they will do almost anything to avoid admitting defeat, especially when their social reputation is on the line. I knew my parents wouldn't just cancel the wedding and tell Savannah the truth. The humiliation of losing the Grand Bella estate and explaining it to their country club friends would be worse than death to Evelyn and Marcus Sterling. So they did exactly what people who are terrible with money always do. They doubled down. "Marcus, Dad. Savannah, stop crying. I'm fixing it. I am calling the venue now to ask for a 72-hour grace period. I'll tell them the trust bank had a routing error. Tomorrow morning, I am taking out a short-term bridge loan against the equity in our house to cover the $100,000. We will pay the venue in cash. Helen. Mom. Marcus. A bridge loan? The interest rates on those are predatory. We can't afford that. Marcus' dad. We don't have a choice, Helen. Do you want Savvy to cancel her wedding? We'll take the loan, pay the venue, and then we'll just have to figure out a way to get the money out of Elena later. We'll tell her you actually had the surgery and demand she reimburse us from the trust. I leaned back in my chair and actually laughed out loud. The sheer, unfathomable hubris of it. To save face, my father was going to take out a catastrophic high-interest loan against his own home, risking his own roof, all while banking on the delusion that he could manipulate me into paying him back later for a fake surgery. He had just handed me the shovel, climbed into the grave, and started throwing the dirt over his own head. Savannah. Thank God. Okay, just get it done. This is so stressful. I need a massage. They survived Friday. My father, presumably sweating through his designer suit, managed to secure the predatory bridge loan by Tuesday. He wired his own heavily borrowed money to the Grand Bella estate, locking in the venue, the orchids, and the outrageously expensive caterer. The wedding was saved, their social status was preserved, and they owed $100,000 to a hard money lender at a 15% interest rate. Over the next 2 weeks, the psychological warfare began. My parents, realizing they needed me to eventually reimburse them, suddenly decided to pretend I existed. My mother called me on a Thursday afternoon, her voice weak, trembling, and dripping with manufactured suffering. "Elena, darling," she breathed into the phone, sounding like a Victorian heroine dying of consumption. "I didn't want to worry you, but I've been so terribly ill." I hit the record button on my office phone system. In my state, single-party consent is perfectly legal for recording conversations. "Oh no, Mom. What's wrong?" I asked, injecting exactly the right amount of daughterly concern into my voice. "It's my heart, sweetie. The doctors, well, they had to perform a very sudden, very expensive experimental procedure. Your father was beside himself. We had to pay for it all out of pocket just to save my life." She let out a pathetic little cough. "I'm recovering now, but it completely drained our savings. Your father is going to send you the medical bills. We're hoping that, as the trustee, you can authorize a reimbursement from Arthur's fund. It's exactly what your grandfather would have wanted." I looked at a photo on my desk of Grandpa Arthur holding me when I was 6. I knew exactly what he would have wanted. He would have wanted me to let them burn. "That sounds terrifying, Mom," I said smoothly. "Of course. Tell Dad to bring the invoices and all the supporting medical documentation to Savannah's rehearsal dinner this weekend. I'll take a look at them and we can discuss the trust's reimbursement protocols." "Oh, thank you, Elena," she said, her voice instantly returning to its normal, robust pitch for a fraction of a second before she remembered she was supposed to be dying. "You're such a good girl. We'll see you Saturday." She hung up. I ended the recording. I saved the audio file to my encrypted cloud drive, placing it neatly in a folder labeled Exhibit B, Helen Sterling Fraudulent Claims, right next to Exhibit A, Group Chat Transcripts. The trap was fully set. All I had to do now was dress for the occasion. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you're enjoying watching this family weave their own financial straitjacket, hit the like button, because what happens at the rehearsal dinner is the reason I kept my backup phone charged. The night of the rehearsal dinner arrived with the kind of oppressive, humid heat that ruins expensive hairstyles. The event was being held at an upscale waterfront country club that my parents could no longer afford but were pretending they could. The dress code on the invitation was understated elegance. I knew what that meant in my family's language. It meant Savannah and her friends would be wearing runway couture, and I was expected to show up in a shapeless beige cardigan so I wouldn't distract from the bride. I didn't wear beige. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped the garment bag I had been hiding in the back of my closet for 3 weeks. Inside was an emerald green silk slip dress. It was custom tailored, backless, and draped over my curves like liquid glass. It cost more than my first car, and I had paid for it in cash. I paired it with gold stiletto heels, swept silk slip dress, so I wouldn't distract from the bride. I didn't wear beige. I walked into my bedroom and unzipped the garment bag I had been hiding in the back of my closet for 3 weeks. Inside was an emerald green silk slip dress. It was custom tailored, backless, and draped over my curves like liquid glass. It cost more than my first car, and I had paid for it in cash. I paired it with gold stiletto heels, swept my hair up into a sharp, elegant twist, and applied a dark, precise red lipstick. I didn't look like the boring accountant. I looked like a woman who owned the bank. I picked up a sleek black leather portfolio. Inside the portfolio were printed copies of the group chat transcripts, the bank's fraud rejection notice, the audio transcript of my mother's fake illness phone call, and a formal, notarized cease and desist letter drafted by my corporate attorney. I drove to the waterfront club, handed my keys to the valet, and walked up the sweeping marble staircase to the private dining room. I could hear Savannah's loud, piercing laugh before I even opened the double mahogany doors. The room was packed with 50 people: Chase's crypto bro groomsmen, Savannah's influencer bridesmaids, and my parents, who were holding court near the private bar. Helen was wearing a diamond necklace and holding a martini, looking remarkably vibrant for a woman who had supposedly just undergone life-saving, out-of-pocket heart surgery. I pushed the doors open and walked in. The reaction was instantaneous. The conversation near the entrance died off. Several of Savannah's friends turned, their eyes widening as they took in the emerald silk and the red lipstick. I didn't slouch. I didn't apologize for taking up space. I walked with the perfectly straight posture of a woman who has nothing left to lose and everything to reveal. My mother spotted me from across the room. Her martini glass paused halfway to her mouth. She blinked, her eyes sweeping over my dress in pure, unadulterated shock. For a second, I saw genuine intimidation flash across her face, quickly replaced by a scowl of deep disapproval. Savannah, wearing a white cocktail dress that looked like it was made of feathers, marched over to me. She didn't say hello. She didn't offer a hug. "What are you wearing?" Savannah hissed, keeping her voice low so Chase's parents couldn't hear. "The dress code was understated, Elena. You look like you're trying to walk a red carpet. You're completely clashing with the aesthetic." "I think I look exactly like a trustee," I said calmly, offering her a cool smile. Before Savannah could process that word, my father appeared at her shoulder. Marcus looked stressed. The bags under his eyes were heavy, a clear sign of a man carrying a high-interest bridge loan. He forced a wide, fake smile, clapping a hand on my shoulder. "Elena, glad you could make it," he said loudly, playing the role of the jovial patriarch. He leaned in close, his breath smelling of expensive scotch and desperation. "Listen, kiddo, I brought that paperwork we talked about, the medical invoices for your mother's surgery. I have them in a folder at my table. I was hoping we could sneak out to the patio in a few minutes, get your signature on the reimbursement forms, and get that squared away tonight." He was trying to hustle me. He wanted to corner me in the dark, pressure me into signing the authorization, and use the trust money to pay off the catastrophic loan he had taken out. I looked at my father. I looked at his desperate, bloodshot eyes, and I smiled. "We don't need to go to the patio, Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the soft background music. "We can do it right here. In fact, I brought my own paperwork." I lifted the black leather portfolio. "We don't need to go to the patio, Dad," I said, my voice carrying clearly over the soft background music of the country club. "We can do it right here. In fact, I brought my own paperwork." I lifted the black leather portfolio and set it down flat on a high-top cocktail table right in the center of the room. My father's forced, jovial smile froze. He looked at the portfolio, then back at me, his eyes narrowing. "Elena, this isn't the time or the place. We have guests. Chase's parents are right over there. Let's just step outside and handle family business privately." "It stopped being private family business the moment you submitted fraudulent documents to a federally regulated bank, Marcus," I said. I didn't yell. I didn't raise my pitch. I spoke in the exact same measured clinical tone I use when I'm deposing a hostile witness in a corporate embezzlement case. But the word fraudulent has a very specific acoustic property in rooms full of wealthy people. It cuts through the ambient noise like a gunshot. The low hum of conversation in the private dining room abruptly died. A waiter holding a tray of champagne flutes stopped dead in his tracks. Savannah's influencer bridesmaids, who had been loudly taking selfies near the floral arrangements, lowered their phones. Chase's parents, a stern-looking couple who prided themselves on their old money connections, turned their heads to stare directly at my father. Helen, realizing that her pristine social event was suddenly teetering on the edge of a cliff, materialized at my father's side. She grabbed my elbow, her manicured nails digging painfully into my skin. "Elena Sterling, you are making a scene," my mother hissed through her teeth, keeping her voice to a venomous whisper. "You will take that folder, you will walk out to the patio with your father, and you will sign the reimbursement form. Do not ruin your sister's weekend with your petty jealousy." I looked down at her hand gripping my arm, then I looked into her eyes. "Let go of me, Mom," I said softly. She hesitated, her eyes flashing with fury, but something in my expression made her fingers go slack. She dropped her hand. I unzipped the black leather portfolio and opened it so the contents faced my parents. "I'm not here to sign a reimbursement for your surgery, Mom," I said, projecting my voice so the entire room could hear. "Mainly because it's a medical miracle that you're standing here drinking a gin martini. Considering the documents Dad faxed to the bank claimed you were undergoing a life-saving open-heart surgical intervention." Savannah stepped forward, her feathered white dress rustling. "Elena, what are you talking about? Mom hasn't had surgery. She's been at the spa all week." "I know," I said, looking at my sister. "But that's not what Dad told Grandpa Arthur's trust." I reached into the portfolio and pulled out the first document. It was a high-resolution, color-printed screenshot of the secret family group chat. I held it up. 3 weeks ago, Mom accidentally added my old backup phone number to a group chat titled Savvy's Dream Day. I explained to the room. The silence now so absolute that I could hear the gentle lapping of the water against the docks outside the window. For the last 21 days, I have had a front-row seat to the daily planning of my own financial manipulation. But the most interesting message was the one Dad sent on Tuesday the 14th. I looked down at the paper and read verbatim. Quote, "Just spoke to the bank. The $100,000 wire from Arthur's trust should clear by Friday for the venue and the caterer. Just keep Elena distracted. If she finds out we're draining the old man's fund for a party, she'll do one of her boring financial lectures and ruin the vibe." End quote. Chase's mother gasped audibly. Chase stepped away from Savannah, looking at his future father-in-law with an expression of profound confusion and growing disgust. "Give me that!" my father roared. The country club facade was completely gone now. He lunged across the cocktail table, trying to snatch the paper from my hand. I took a smooth step back, out of his reach, in my emerald silk dress and stilettos, moving with the practiced grace of a woman who has choreographed this exact moment 100 times in her head. "Don't bother, Dad. I have 50 more pages," I said, pulling out the next document. It was the crimson-red bank rejection notice. "You assumed that because you play golf with Jim, the branch manager, you could bypass the trust's strict restriction against frivolous lifestyle expenses. You assumed you could forge a medical invoice, forge my signature as the sole trustee, and wire $100,000 to a botanical garden. You have no idea what you're talking about," Helen shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly off the mahogany walls. "You are a liar. We are wealthy. Marcus, tell them she's a liar." But Marcus couldn't speak. He was staring at the crimson-red bank notice in my hand, his face the color of wet ash. He was finally realizing the catastrophic magnitude of what he had done. He hadn't just lied to his daughter. He had left a digital paper trail of felony wire fraud. I turned my attention to Savannah, who was standing frozen, her mouth slightly open. "Your wedding isn't being funded by Dad's success, Savvy," I told her, my voice softening just a fraction, not out of pity, but out of a desire to make sure she understood the exact mechanics of her own ruin. "It was being funded by an attempted crime. When I saw the pending wire in the fiduciary portal, I placed a compliance hold on the account. That's why the wire didn't clear on Friday." "You," Savannah stammered, tears suddenly welling in her eyes as the reality of the situation collided with her influencer aesthetic. "You canceled my payment?" "No," I corrected her. "The Federal Corporate Fraud Division canceled your payment because Dad's forged medical invoices didn't pass their review." I pulled out the next screenshot from the group chat, which led to this message from Dad, sent at 3:51 p.m. last Friday. I cleared my throat and read to the silent, captive audience. Quote, "The wire was rejected. Jim said corporate took the file. If I push it, they'll launch a full investigation. Helen, the invoices were fake. If they investigate, we're looking at federal wire fraud. End quote. Stop reading, my father shouted, his voice cracking, the deep resonance of his patriarchal authority completely shattered. He looked frantically at the crowd, at Chase's wealthy parents, at the influencers who were now undeniably recording the entire scene on their phones. This is private family business. You have no right to air this out here. I have every right, I replied calmly. I am the legal fiduciary of the Arthur Sterling Family Trust. It is my legal, binding obligation to protect the principal from theft, especially when the thieves are trying to manipulate me into covering up their crime. I looked at my mother. You called me on Thursday, Mom. You put on a weak, raspy voice and told me you had an experimental heart procedure. You begged me to authorize a reimbursement for the out-of-pocket costs to save Dad from bankruptcy. Helen stood rigid, her eyes wide, trapped in the headlights of her own lies. I was confused, she stammered desperately, grasping for any lifeline. The medication. I didn't know what I was saying. I live in a single-party consent state for audio recordings, Mom, I said flatly. I recorded the call. I have the audio file saved in 3 different encrypted cloud servers alongside the group chat transcripts. Savannah, finally understanding the full picture, turned to our father. Dad, she said, her voice shaking with panic. If the trust didn't pay for the venue, how did the venue get paid? You told me it was handled. My father couldn't look at her. He stared at the carpet. I answered for him. He took out a short-term predatory bridge loan against the equity in the house, Savvy, at an astronomical interest rate, because he knew if you lost the venue, everyone in this room would realize the Sterling family is actually broke. Chase, the crypto entrepreneur fiancé, finally spoke up. He stepped completely away from Savannah, crossing his arms. Wait, you guys are broke? You took out a hard money loan to pay for this weekend? Chase, please, it's just a cash flow issue, Helen pleaded, reaching out toward her future son-in-law. Chase's mother, an imperious woman dripping in real diamonds, stepped forward and pulled her son back by the arm. She looked at my parents as if they were a disease she had almost contracted. We will not be marrying into a family under federal investigation for wire fraud, she said, her voice dripping with absolute, freezing contempt. Chase, get your coat. We are leaving. Chase, no! Please! Savannah screamed, the carefully curated Tuscan royalty bride completely dissolving into a hysterical, sobbing mess. But Chase didn't look back. He followed his parents out the mahogany doors, his groomsmen awkwardly trailing behind him. The room was falling apart, and I stood perfectly still in the center of the wreckage, holding my black portfolio. My father turned to me, his fists clenched, his face a terrifying mask of desperation and ruin. Are you happy now, Elena? Are you happy? You destroyed your sister's wedding. You destroyed this family. Over what? Your own pathetic jealousy because you couldn't be a bridesmaid? I looked at him. I looked at the man who had treated me like an inconvenience my entire life. The man who was perfectly willing to risk federal prison just to throw a party for a daughter who respected him only for his wallet. I'm not jealous, Dad, I said quietly. I'm just doing my job. I reached into the portfolio one last time and pulled out a thick, legally bound document stamped by a notary. I set it gently on the cocktail table in front of him. This is a formal cease and desist, drafted by my corporate attorney, I explained. It officially notifies you that due to your documented attempt to defraud the Arthur Sterling Family Trust, you and Helen are permanently removed as beneficiaries of the discretionary monthly allowance. You violated the morality clause. The trust is sealed. You will never see another dime of Grandpa Arthur's money. Helen let out a sound that was less of a sob and more of a wounded animal's wail. The monthly allowance from the trust was the only thing keeping their heavily mortgaged lifestyle afloat. Without it, and with the predatory bridge loan demanding payment, they were mathematically, undeniably ruined. You can't do that, my father whispered, the fight finally draining out of him, leaving only the hollow shell of a man who had gambled his life on a lie and lost. Elena, please, we'll lose the house. You already lost it, I said. The moment you decided I was too stupid to read the receipts, I zipped the black leather portfolio shut. I didn't wait for the rest of the guests to leave. I didn't offer Savannah a shoulder to cry on. I turned my back on the weeping bride, the ruined patriarch, and the hysterical mother, and I walked toward the exit. My stilettos clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. Nobody tried to stop me. Savannah's influencer friends scrambled out of my way as if I were made of fire. I pushed the heavy mahogany doors open, walked down the sweeping marble staircase, and handed my ticket to the valet. When my car pulled up, I tipped the driver a $20 bill, slid into the driver's seat, and drove away from the country club. The humid night air rushed through the windows, and I felt a profound, overwhelming lightness in my chest. If you are wondering what happened to the Tuscan royalty wedding, I promise you, the aftermath was just as spectacular as the dinner. If you love seeing karma balance the ledgers, make sure you're subscribed, because the ending is pure accounting poetry. Chase didn't just cancel the wedding. His family's lawyers sent my parents a demand letter for the costs they had incurred paying for the rehearsal dinner. With the wedding off, the Granbella estate retained the $100,000 payment as a non-refundable cancellation penalty. My father was left holding a predatory bridge loan he couldn't pay, with no monthly allowance from the trust to bail him out. Within 4 months, the hard money lender initiated foreclosure proceedings on their home. Marcus and Helen had to file for Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They currently live in a 2-bedroom apartment complex on the outskirts of the city. Helen complains loudly to anyone who will listen in the grocery store checkout line about her ungrateful, thieving daughter, but nobody takes her seriously anymore. The country club revoked their membership years ago. Savannah lost her influencer sponsorships when the footage of the rehearsal dinner inevitably leaked online. The internet does not take kindly to people who try to fake terminal illnesses to fund luxury weddings. She works as a receptionist at a mid-tier dermatology clinic now, and from what I hear, she complains constantly about the dress code. As for me, I did exactly what Grandpa Arthur trusted me to do. I protected the principal. I never reported them to the federal authorities for the wire fraud. As much as they deserved it, I didn't want the legal headache of testifying in a criminal trial. Locking them out of the trust and letting their own financial incompetence destroy them was a much more elegant, satisfying solution. I sold my condo a year later and used a portion of my own savings, not the trust, to buy a beautiful, historic home with a massive library. I was promoted to senior partner at my auditing firm. I spend my weekends reading, drinking excellent wine, and occasionally looking at the balance of the Arthur Sterling Family Trust, which continues to compound quietly in the dark. My family spent 29 years assuming that because I was quiet, I was weak. They thought my refusal to engage in their dramatic screaming matches meant I was a pushover they could use to fund their fabricated reality. They learned the hard way that the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one yelling the loudest. It's the one quietly reading the fine print. That is my story. One secret group chat, one forged invoice, and $100,000 lesson in why you should never try to audit an auditor. If you have ever been the boring one in your family, the practical one they only call when they need something fixed, take this as your sign to stop fixing their mistakes. Let them feel the full weight of their own liabilities. Thank you so much for joining me today on Whispered Drama Stories. If you enjoyed watching the truth empty this family's bank account, drop a comment below and tell me your favorite moment from the rehearsal dinner. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone who needs a reminder to check their own receipts. Stay calm, know your worth, and I will see you in the next one.